I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like. All right, what's up, world? Welcome back again to I Mix What I Like Live. I'm Jared Ball, happy to be your host. Please again go to imixwhatilike.org and subscribe there so you don't miss anything that I and my entire collective crew and expanded community do across a variety of media platforms and forms of communication. So again, I mixwhatilike.org there so you don't miss anything that we do. Please do subscribe here, like, retweet, share, all of that good stuff for this channel. And as this conversation goes, please encourage others to join us. And if you see it after the live, please feel free to be in touch with your thoughts as well. Normally, we would want to take a few minutes to talk about political prisoners and all of that and encourage you to involve yourself with that. I want to do that very quickly here, but we want to be respectful and mindful of the time that we have, just about a little over an hour or so with our next guest. So I want to make sure we privilege all of that. So maybe I'll come back at the end and we'll talk up some of that with you as well. Please do get in the chat with your comments. Those of you here live, thank you for joining us. And please do feel free to raise your comments. We'll get to them throughout and as much as possible. And same thing for those who see this after the fact, we'll try to get to those as well. But joining me for this conversation about reparations is one of the most preeminent thinkers on the subject, of course. He is Professor Ray Winbush, who is a research professor and the director of the Institute for Urban Research at Morgan State University. And as a scholar and activist, he is known for his systems thinking approaches to understanding the impact of racism or white supremacy on the global African community. His writings, consultations, and research have been instrumental in understanding developmental stages in Black males, public policy, and its connection to compensatory justice, relationships between Black males and females, infusion of African studies into school curricula, and the impact of hip-hop culture on the contemporary African landscape. And I would just want to add one thing, as we said of one of our previous guests recently, Lynn Washington. I would have to say the same thing for Professor Winbush here, somebody who people would have to understand through working with him off the record and outside of the public eye and often behind the scenes, how supportive he is to a number of faculty on campuses where he works and elsewhere. We always have to big that up because it's not a given that people, particularly at the senior levels that he has reached, will be supportive of junior faculty, and particularly those who take certain positions politically where they work. So I just wanted to take that moment to thank Dr. Winbush for his personal support of me and many others as I've seen over the years working with him at Morgan State University. And without further ado, Dr. Winbush, thank you again for joining us and good morning to you.
Oh, good to see you, Jared, brother Jared. It's good to be here.
So always happy to talk to you. And when I was still doing the Academics and Cars series, we were trying to set that up and through my own scheduling, we couldn't get that to happen. So, I guess if there is a fortunate to this COVID moment, it's a chance to catch up with people, at least, virtually. So I'm glad to do this with you. And given your, again, expertise, which we will talk about over the course of this next hour on the issue of reparations, I wanted to start with this broad question, again, that accepting they are due, not debating whether or not reparations are due, accepting that they are due, how do you think they should be handled going forward, especially given the moment we're in now?
Well, that's a debate even among reparations activists. There's a lot of schools of thought. Probably the most recent one, which I tend to reject, is that has been brought forward by Sandy Darity in his new book. I know Sandy very well, but it's almost like a money only with him. He brings forth and did a study that said that reparations in terms of being owed is something like $6.25 quadrillion. Now, that's a ridiculous figure as far as I'm concerned. But being on C-SPAN and all these other shows, it kind of trivializes what reparations are all about. I think the money-only approach is something that is really something that is pushed by the right wing to again, trivialize reparations. I think it's like, Jared, the civil rights movement, if you want to make that fairly good comparison, that in 1954, after Brown v. Board, of course, that auspiciously was about school desegregation. But spinoffs of that included, open housing, Voting Rights Act, affirmative action, all of that. I think that reparations can take the form of money payments. I do believe that. I think it can take the form of repatriation. My brothers and sisters in the Caribbean said, look, give me $100,000 and I'm out of here. I'm going back to Africa. It can take the form, and I'm just thinking of some of the debates we've had among ourselves, about a reparations bank that would be run by a committee and so forth, which is more capitalistic. My colleague Charles Barron, an assemblyman up in New York, and we've done a lot of work together. He said, look, don't give anybody any money, because all you're going to do is pour it back into the very system that created the problem in the first place. So there's a lot of thoughts. I think land is another one. And some of my colleagues have talked about that. So the debate is still there, but what we all agree on is that they owe us in some form.
Could you expand on that point you raised a little bit about the if I understood you correctly, the conservative nature of a money only approach? Why would, because I think a lot of people who would hear that might, at least initially, disagree with your assertion. In other words, when Black people turn on the TV and they see Sandy Darity or anyone else saying, you owe us, quadrillion, however, what was that? I forgot the number, $6 quadrillion. Yes, six, and they get specific 6.25 quadrillion. I could imagine a lot of people you start, cheering him and thinking this is, go brother, go, like, get us that, get us that check as we, why? Why do you disagree or consider that to be a conservative?
Well, another person that espouses the money only is Robert Johnson, the former CEO of BET. He had has a very, very simple formula. He says, give every man, woman, and Black baby, literally $350,000 a year cash, tax-free. And that amounts roughly to about $14 trillion, which is in the neighborhood of where most people think it should be.
You mean a one-time payment of $350,000?
Right. So if you have your wife, 2 children, you would get, what is that, 350 times 4. That family would get that, even if that baby is 18 months old. Mm-hmm. And the idea is that you then eliminate issues like affirmative action. You eliminate people saying, well, we want set-asides and all of that, as if the money cures everything. And it doesn't. It's like saying, years ago, we're going to pass the Equal Rights Amendment, and then there will be no more discrimination against women, or we got Brown v. Board and there won't be any more racism. So I think that money only approaches, I am not opposed at all to giving money for reparations. I can cite some examples that have already been done where money was involved. But if that's all it is, I think it gives it's almost like somehow money is going to cure all of the problems and also release the society, specifically the United States, from any other obligations toward African people. And I don't believe that.
Almost kind of like saying, Obama got elected, so your political issues are taken care of now, something like that, yeah.
And which Mitch McConnell essentially said when they were talking about reparations. Well, you got Barack Obama, like, wow, I'm supposed to be satisfied now. So that actually was said by Mitch McConnell.
Well, that's actually, it's interesting that I plan to bring this up, but we might as well do it here. It's a good segue, because some have argued similar to that that, well, why should not again, I don't want to get, I'm accepting that reparations are due, but some have argued that one reason that they're not is because not only have we been given Obama, but historically we've been given voting rights acts and civil rights acts and affirmative action, and we've been made citizens, and all of these things that are supposedly have opened the door to opportunity and boundless opportunity. But anyway, and then, which is also I've seen led to the debate is, well, when should we count the total number owed? Should it start from enslavement, or should we even just start from Jim Crow?
I think we should start from 1441. I'm going all the way back to when the first Africans were taken out of the continent and put on Madeira Island by the Portuguese. I would start at 1441, and I would probably end, yesterday. I mean,
or what time is it now?
11:10 or something. So I mean, I think that I think the society somehow feels that, I've heard over and over, white people have said to me in presentations on racism, on reparations, they'll say something like, well, didn't we sacrificed 600,000 men during the Civil War?
Oh, wow.
So, wow, then I ask them immediately how many Black people died in the Civil War, and they don't know. As if what they did in the Civil War. So it's like, I think white people are always looking for absolutions from the sins of the past. And I think doing that about money only with reparations is another nuanced approach to that. And so and also it says, well, if we do that, isn't that enough? And the answer is no. I mean, it'll be enough, like Derek Bell, the late Derek Bell said that racism is always going to be here. And everything that you do to expand it, make it grow and everything is another, point at which you've got to do something about it. Now, until we get rid of racism, and you let me know, I mean, my ridiculous colleague Dinesh D'Souza, who wrote a book a few years ago called The End of Racism, and I bought it because I wanted to know when it ended. Was it June 8th? I don't know, 1999 or when?
Did he give a definitive stop date for it?
Right.
I didn't read the book.
He did. He just said it was ended because, I mean, we saw that with Obama's election. We're post-racial. No. I mean, those are some of the myths that I think Ta-Nehisi Coates talks about in his books and his writings, about that somehow this country is always wanting to escape its responsibility while telling us, Black folk and indigenous people, to be responsible and take responsibility. Well, let them take responsibility on certain things.
Well, it's again, that's interesting. You've led me to another point I wanted to raise with you, which is this. So I'm happy. There need not be any order to it. But Ta-Nehisi Coates, in many ways, representing a lot of the popular scholarship on the issue, or conversation at least on the issue, is a proponent of reparations. Wrote a very famous defense for the case for reparations. What impact do you think that people like him or other popular discussants of reparations, even those who say they are proponents of it? So, for instance, in other words, I just said the other day with Adolph Reed that I disagreed with him, that I don't think Bernie Sanders was necessarily a net positive in the promotion of socialism, even though he, is often claimed to have made it more popular a concept. I don't believe that. Is Coates, does he help your argument and your effort, or the effort of those with whom you work on this issue?
I think everybody helps in a little ways, in small ways about reparations. I mean, Randall Robinson at the turn of the century, wrote a book, The Debt, that I think, in fact, my book about reparations, my first book about reparation, the debt was an answer to his question, the debt should America pay? And I made an argument, within the book with other authors about the empirical history of reparation. Well, I think that Ta-Nehisi did something that I haven't done in my presentation of reparations. Usually I start with the past, 40 Acres and the Mule, Belinda Royale Sutton, and move forward. What Coates did, to his credit, is start now with the mortgage ripoffs that had been occurring for decades in Chicago and move backwards to the Civil War, tracing one family in particular. And by the time you get through reading that article, which I think was the brilliance of it, you say, we had to do something about this. So he started in the present and moved to the past. I usually start in the past and move to the present. And I think that, so I've gotten a lot of calls. Well, from housing, I did something a couple weeks ago with New York Housing Authority, because they were saying, well, we've got all this redlining stuff that historical, what should we do about it? That's probably thanks to Coates. So I think everybody adds arguments to it. My colleague Wade Nobles out in California, he makes, an argument for the idea of psychological reparations. So people like, Lil Wayne, he just sold the rights to his music for $100 million, but so he doesn't need the money. But I think there may be, and with all due respect to Lil Wayne, he may need psychological reparations. And Wade makes a contribution about that. So I think everybody adds a little to the argument, including Coates. It's not perfect, because if you read his article, Coates never at the end of the article says, this is how much it should be. I'm glad Sandy said there should be $6.25 quadrillion. And although that's an absurd figure, it at least shows the magnitude of how much occurred to Africans after they were stolen from the continent.
Yeah, somebody was raising the question here, what happened to the 17 trillion? And I was saying what happened to it is it became 6.25 quadrillion. I don't even know what that number is or how many zeros that even looks. I don't even know what that looks like in print. Yeah. But when I hear that argument, and one reason why I think that some versions of reparations are more welcomed, and particularly on commercial media spaces like that, is because when people hear that figure, it's understood, particularly in those spaces, that white audiences who hear that are going to think, my God, that is a ridiculous number. We're not paying that. And then it can be easily dismissed. So on the one hand, you get the credit for making it seem like you're on, CNN or whatever, or C-SPAN, making the argument. But the hosts and the directors and the owners of those networks know that it's not going to get anywhere. So that's one part of a reason why I've personally taken to arguing something slightly differently, which admittedly has been made me be accused in some spaces of not supporting reparations. So I want to hear your thoughts on this in particular. Sure. So just tactically speaking, any reparative project, particularly one that would transfer wealth, would require a large segment of white Americans to sign off on that. And I just can't see them doing that. I can't see them saying we're going to transfer wealth just to Black people. So I said, well, then why don't we just make the target for redistribution, at least before COVID, the $20 trillion gross domestic product of the country, and just say in perpetuity, X% of that GDP is going to get redistributed to everybody, so that we have free healthcare, free housing, free schools. Everybody has a job. Everybody has job training. Everybody has clean water. I mean, everything, like the roads get paid. Like so instead of the 1% getting a lion's share, that 20 trillion, all of us get it. And that way we don't have to have the arguments over, I don't want white people saying we didn't own anybody. Why should we pay? And Asians saying, well, we suffer too. And this group saying we suffer too. And then within the diaspora, I mean, you've already touched on it already. There's an international aspect to reparations to your approach, but others are saying, but only Black people here should get it, and to the exclusion of even the solidarity work with any other group. So I'm saying to just tactically get around all of that, redistribute everything, and then once that is done within our own communities, all those other reparative projects can be taken up, spiritual, psychological, etc. What do you think of that? What's wrong with my argument?
Well, this sort of thing, I hate to say, well, this is what's wrong with your argument.
No, I mean, it's cool.
What the reason I actually think that the approach of being more specific to the group where the injury occurred is more conservative than your argument. That I don't conceive this society ever getting to a point that is more socialistic, not a la Bernie Sanders, but just saying, why don't we just redistribute wealth? Why don't we have a system that gets rid of the Jeff Bezos and some of these other fat cats and let everybody have a decent living, a decent education, healthcare, and so forth. I actually think that Black reparations are much easier. And see, the other thing, Jared, is that
that's legit.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing is that it's like nobody, that radical president Ronald Reagan gave reparations to the Japanese who had been interned during World War II. Native Americans, not all of them, but some of the Lakotas, some of the Klamaths of Oregon, they have gotten reparation. And we've seen concomitant raising of healthcare because of money. This dude in the White House was complaining that his, some of his gambling casinos collapsed because of, indigenous people who don't have to pay tax on that stuff. I think that there's, again, a lot of ways of doing reparation. One that I should have mentioned, there's a school of thought among the reparations activists that, look, Black folk just don't pay taxes for the next 25 years. And when I'm saying no taxes, I'm talking about no income tax, no sales tax, no property tax, no type of tax, no payroll tax. And that's a form of reparations. And I know a lot of people who are very strong on that issue. So I think that my plan or our plan is more feasible than say, let's just redistribute wealth altogether.
I just was thinking in terms, maybe you're right. I was just thinking in terms of the amount of support needed for that to happen. I was thinking if everybody's getting something, then everybody would be more likely to support it. But maybe you're right. I think that's a legit response.
This is my feeling. When I was looking at the Black Lives Matter demonstration for Breonna and George Floyd last summer, like the only time, and correct me if I'm wrong, the only time that white people have ever fought white people on behalf of Black people was the American Civil War. And then 12 years after that, the so-called Compromise of 1877, they abandoned us to get Rutherford B. Hayes elected president. I've told young people, since last summer, I said, look, don't count on white people to help you with your struggle. It's like, as I have told, Palestinians, don't count on some kind of alliance with Israel to help you get free. I think that white people are always going to resist anything that they perceive as somehow taking from them. I don't care what it is. They did it throughout our history. John Hope Franklin was my teacher when I was at Chicago doing my degree. And his dad, Buck Franklin, was the lawyer for those who were, killed in the Tulsa massacre that will celebrate their 100th anniversary, or not celebrate, or commemorate the 100th anniversary next year. Well, Dr. Franklin used to say, he said, I don't care what it is, whenever Black people seemingly are making an advance about anything, white people are going to oppose it. So white opposition to reparations is like, that's part of the struggle. We know that. I'm heartened when I see that double the amount of white people now support reparations as opposed to 10 years ago. And much of that support, in quotation marks, came as a result of the demonstrations last summer. But I just never rely on white people to do anything without kicking and screaming to the table.
Yeah, again, that's why I keep thinking if the argument is particularly the poorer ones, you will benefit too, and you don't have to think of this as being specific help for Black people or repair for Black people, that they would be more likely to do it. But it's the logic of white supremacy is illogical, so it's hard to track it. So I don't know, and you may I just have to keep thinking about your point. I don't know. And that's why in general I just support these efforts. But I do want to come back to that point you raised at least a little bit of the international aspect of this, because so if as your approach, and one I would agree with, particularly as a Pan-Africanist, that it go back to 1441 and count everybody, well then, so are you saying that the reparations movement be organized internationally and then collectively collect the debt collectively from the West? Or are you saying that each individual African community collectively working go to their particular colonial administrator, for lack of a better word, for repair?
I think both. I reject the notion that ADOS, the American descendants of slave, what a terrible name, but I reject their notion that we should just think about us. And I reject the whole idea. First, let me just say that the reparations struggle has always been international. It has never been just about my thing and forget about everybody else. I think that like the CARICOM community, the Caribbean community, is very organized about reparations, but they also help us and we help them. And we've been cooperative in a lot of different ways. I did a workshop with Hilary Beckles in Scotland and was surprised a few years ago and was surprised to see several African people in Europe with their own reparation struggle. So we help each other. The idea that ADOS, and I don't want to make this about ADOS, but the idea that somehow we should only think about ourselves in this landmass and not think about our brothers and sisters, throughout the diaspora, to me is just ridiculous. And other thing, you got to look at where ADOS is coming from. I mean, they're funded primarily by, anti-immigration white folks from the far right, many of whom are Trump supporters and others. So I think they've got another motive that they don't like to uncover about or expose to the public. So I think it's international, and I've always viewed it as international. And not only me, but anybody who's a true Pan-Africanist sees it as international.
Yeah, that's why we only drink soda here. Solidarity of Dispersed Africans. Thanks, right. Dr. Ichile. And please go check the talk we just had with her this morning, folks. If you didn't see it, it was great. And Blood Honey, I put it at the bottom. Soda is Solidarity of Dispersed Africans. It's a Dr. Hate special. I can't claim credit for it, but I'm running with it because it's backwards never. And I don't want to make it about them either. But they are having an impact, and one of their leaders crashed one of my Clubhouse chats the other day, or I shouldn't say crashed. Was what would be the word? Was wildly supported and encouraged to be welcomed onto the quote unquote stage for a talk I was involved in, and misrepresented the whole history. So my only thing about them, which I think is being addressed here, is that what is of evidence to me, without even getting to the background or who actually supports them, which I think you're right in pointing out, is the aggressive attack on the radical traditions that many of us come out of. that when you attack Pan-Africanism and when you attack radical nationalism or all nationalism, when you attack the entire African-centered world, when you attack the entire Black socialist Marxist world, I mean, they attacked everybody. And you know, I'm saying if you're going to wipe out every radical tradition in the African world that has supported Africans in this country, that makes me suspicious of your motives, rather than working with people that have been doing it for so long and buttressing their efforts, trying to replace or supplant them makes me, you know, is one reason why, you know. So anyway, but this question of the international approach, similar to again the argument against that group, is that there has been nothing that has benefited, as I'm aware historically, Africans in this country that has not had an international or diaspora support to it.
Exactly.
So even if you're just interested, even if you don't, like I used to joke, I'm not a Pan-Africanist because I'm friends with my Gambian neighbor any more than I wouldn't be a Pan-Africanist if we didn't get along. You know, even if I'm just out for my own enlightened self-interest, I would want Pan-African support for my reparations. So could you say another word or two about how that is all working, or how you see that international project working in league with one another to support one another in these claims?
Well, yeah, I mean, you know, I participate in a broadcast every Sunday of Africans from all over the diaspora. It comes out of England with or UK, I guess they don't like me to call it England. Glenroy Watson, a labor leader there, is a good friend of mine, and we just talk. We talk for an hour about what's going on all aspects of the continent, the Caribbean and Europe, Venezuela. The fact the talk last week was about Venezuela and the revolution. It is taking place there in one very way, but I learned a lot. I think so. You intellectually support your colleagues around the country. You should also, as I told, you know, my students and others, I said, all of us should have what I call a Pan-African project, that you do something that is international. I do something it's small, but I've been overjoyed about it. I buy malaria nets throughout Africa that I pay a little bit each month for that, and other things as well. I think in terms of the international movement relative to reparations, I think that we should just be joined up. ADOS is really an isolated group here in the United States that is making headway among those who know little or nothing about Pan-Africanism and the history of it. You know, so they may know about, I ain't gonna mention the name, but they may know about a certain sister and a certain brother from LA, but they don't know about who Sylvester Williams is, or George Padmore, or people like that. And we need to be teaching them those issues, as well as their view of, you know, Pan-Africanism. Your friend, Yvette Madison, and I gave a lecture at Harvard, 3 weeks ago, 2-3 weeks ago, and we were bombarded afterwards by ADOS. I think some of them were bots and stuff like that, but we were just bombarded in the chat room about this stuff. And I mean, and if you're against everything, I mean, that's a nihilistic approach, you know, to so many things, and to dismiss other Pan-Africanists, which they have done very subtly, like Malcolm X and others who have, you know, or Kwame Ture, all of these people. I mean, it just shows that not only an anti-intellectualism, but as far as I'm concerned, as a psychologist, shows a tremendous amount of cultural and self-hate.
Well, again, my thing was and remains that it's not an issue of not being willing to disagree or engage. In fact, quite the opposite. My experience has been similar to what you described there. It's the dogmatic approach that they present is hostile and resistant to engagement or discussion. I mean, that was initially what caused my personal break with the two founders, was that I was asking them if they would just have a discussion about what it is that they think Pan-Africanism means and what version of Pan-Africanism they're critical of. And all I got was hostility and neglect and worse. And you know, but some of it's going on in the chat here, and I don't want to engage all of that, and I don't want this to become all about them. In fact, quite the opposite. But there is one specific question to something that I think I raised, a critique of it, that I'd be interested in having you or each of us address, because first of all, I think the question somewhat misrepresents my point, but I would be interested that the Cali House movement exclusively focused on relief for the aging freedmen. So that's not true that but my point would be, my point isn't that a reparative project focused specifically on Africans or Black people here makes it non-international. What my point would be is that the Cali House movement overall was supported by an international struggle of African people resisting enslavement. And as I've learned in reading your work and others about the history of Belinda, also advocating specifically for reparations. Exactly. Making cases and making arguments referencing other cases that were happening throughout the diaspora. So it's not to say that a reparative project wouldn't be focused specifically on Black people here, or Africans in Brazil, or Africans in Panama, or Africans elsewhere, but it would be to say that each one of those efforts is supported and buttressed and made stronger by support of an international movement. Professor Winbush.
No, I agree with that. I mean, you know, that kind of critique, I mean, you know, that's like a, 1 mile wide and 1 inch deep critique, I call them, because it's like saying that the Montgomery bus boycott wasn't an international Pan-African movement. I mean, but it is in the keeping of struggle that Africans have had throughout the globe. We have struggled in Namibia and South Africa, and I see all of those important for the overall global international struggle of Africans against white oppression. Sir Hilary Beckles says something that I think is just, I've always quoted in his book, like I forget Denton's, whatever the name of his book is, I forget the name of it.
Yeah, me too. I thought I had it. I thought I had it right.
Black Debt of Britain or something like that.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Black Debt. But he said essentially what African people have been doing with Cali House, with Patrice Lumumba, with Mandela and Walter Sisulu in South Africa and Tambo, all over the Caribbean. We've been cleaning up white people's mess for 500 years. I mean, that's basically what we've been doing. We've done it with what Cali House did after the Civil War, or what Eric Williams did down in Trinidad. We've been cleaning up their mess. And all the reparation struggle says is that it is time for you to pay us for leaving the mess and for us just to clean it up. And you expect us to, deal with the stuff that you created. So, I mean, a couple of years ago, one of my colleagues, Glenn Robinson, and I, we were asked by the government of Tanzania to deal with traffic in Tanzania. Well, Glenn is a specialist about traffic. I was unaware that the most fatal accidents that occur in the world are all on the African continent. And so when we went to Tanzania, I never was so, I mean, I've driven in Africa a lot, but it's interesting that after the British left Tanzania, after the French left places like Senegal, they pulled the plug on everything, traffic lights. So the people there just got used to not having traffic lights and just driving in helter-skelter. So we had to talk, I didn't know that. But I think that that's another example of cleaning up white people's mess. And I think that's all reparations are dealing with. The British left illiteracy throughout the Caribbean, among us here in this country, and among Africans in South America and Bahia and places like that. And we got to do something about it. And they need to help us do that. And they owe us to do that. That's it.
So again, tactically, for me, again, it's the same thing with everything. I'm not asking any of us, again, I happen to be friendly with my Gambian neighbor, but that's not why I'm a Pan-Africanist. If we were not friendly, I would still feel the same way, just tactically. And I'm not even saying that we need to be friendly the same way I feel about white folks. I'm not saying that all Africans need to be holding hands and singing Kumbaya and acting like we don't have differences or hostilities. I'm simply saying tactically. I'm sure that even South Africans, some of whom I've met that don't have a particular love affair for Black Americans, do appreciate Black America's support for the anti-apartheid struggle. So the same thing would be said in reverse. I don't need you all to love us. But I would appreciate it if you would put pressure on your leadership to say, give those Black folks over there some reparations, and then maybe we can have some conversations about, repairing some of the colonial issues that we still dealing with on the continent, as one example, and vice versa. What about this question? I didn't want to make sure we get to it before we have to leave. But what about this question that particularly the money form of reparations is acquiesces to the capitalist and imperial system that generates the wealth in the first place? What do you say about that when you hear that?
Jared, this is, as a scholar, this is something that I've wrestled with for many, many years. Within the social science, I'm going to answer this in this way. We have people like Naeem Akbar, Wade Nobles, Linda James Myers, who developed what is now referred to as Black psychology. We had Joyce Ladner, the former president of Howard, develop what is called, Black sociology. We have a plethora of people who have developed Black history. I've been critical. Now, here's a good internal critique that Africans need to have. We have yet, among Black economists, to develop a good Black economic theory. The Black economists that I know tend to say, well, you're going to be capitalist over here, you're going to be Marxist over there, maybe a socialist over there, but we don't have our own theory. And so, I've been doing some study with Julius Nyerere in Tanzania, about 50 years ago, and seeing how that's what he was trying to do. But I've been critical of my Black economic economists, brothers and sisters. I said, where's our theory about what an African-centered economy looks like? Does it have to be capitalist? Does it have to be socialist? I mean, is it a combination of both of those? I don't know how. What should it look like? And I think they've been remiss. So I agree that I think that, and Charles Barron and I talk about this a lot, I agree that there has to be, we've got, if, you'll hear Black folks say, well, if you give Black folk $350,000, like Robert Johnson said, they're going to make the Cadillac dealer rich the next day. They buying 10 Cadillacs and a house or something like, I think that we tend to believe that the only way reparations can be paid and should be paid is to support a capitalist system. I had one brother say, well, if I, if I got I would get a franchise. I said, what do you mean? I would buy me 3 or 4 McDonald's franchises. Well, see, that's pouring back into the system. So I want to look at more alternatives to how money, capital, if you want to use that term, and economies in general look like. And I think that's part of the reparations discussion too.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I this is way outside of my lane, but I admit I've been looking a lot over the last year, in particular, at modern monetary theory in trying to answer my own questions about buying power, et cetera. And the simple point that I'm learning, or I'm getting from their approach is more or less something a lot of us have been saying in different ways, if I understand it, and I may not, which is that once Nixon took the country off the gold standard, you're just basically making it up. whether it's printing money or a few keystrokes like they did over the summer with the CARES and the HOPE Act and this last 800 billion for the war machine that they passed while everybody's in the streets starving and in lines for food. In some ways, what I'm saying is that the reason I keep wanting to focus on the GDP argument is that not, part of it is the tactical piece, but part of it is also just to say, like, all of this is some nonsense. Like, we don't have to be fussing with each other over. In other words, it's not that they're taking our taxes and figuring out like a budget in a household. How do we spend it on this, or do we pay this bill or that bill? No, you can do everything. So my point would be that on some level, it shouldn't matter if the brother wants to go buy 10 Cadillacs or 3 McDonald's, because yes, it's supporting this current economy, but on one level, it's what would save this current economy. And then my argument would be, once we got to the psychological safety space of, I don't have to kill myself to pay a bill or to pay off a loan, then we can figure out the next step of, well, what new economy do we develop? What new level of anyway, so I don't know if you have to, I don't know. I'm just,
Look, I was on a webinar on Saturday with a young brother, and he said, look, I'm going to tell you what the new economy is going to be. And he's into this, cryptocurrency, Bitcoins and Ethereum and all of this. He said that we can control totally. I don't know enough about it. Okay. I'm just admitting it. But he says that he said, fiat currency is dead. Like you said, when Nixon went off the gold standard, it's dead. And he said it's going to keep on dying, and we need to get into cryptocurrency. And he swears that's going to be the basis of a new African theory of economics. So that's
well, the only reason I've heard that too. The only reason I disagree with that is because the piece that everybody, including me, leaves out in all of this is that everything is backed up by military violence. So the idea that you can Bitcoin yourself out of colonialism is, to me, as much mythological as people saying you can buy your way or business your way out of white supremacy. Right. So I don't know if I agree with that. Like, we're still going to need political organization and political power. Absolutely. Anyway, let me take a quick look at the chat. Is there anything? One other broad thing, because I know we don't have all day, is there anything else in terms of how you see popular discussions of reparations conducted that you would like to address, even if in brief, in this conversation? Is there something that we haven't said that you would need us to say or to think about, at least going forward?
Well, I think that, this sounds real simple, but for me, it's very important. A lot of people who have opinions about reparations know very little about the history of African oppression. And I'm talking about globally. I'm amazed that I'll raise like incidents. Like, I think we're coming up on the anniversary of We Charge Genocide in a couple of days. And I've said that not just to students who are undergraduates, but I've said it to colleagues from, what is We Charge Genocide? I thought that was just an expression. They haven't read the book. And I think that if I could wave a magic wand across Africans across the globe, I would say, look, spend the next year reading books about our struggle. And I'm talking about not just now, but I'm talking about for the past 500 years. I'm doing a rereading of Kwame Ture's autobiography, which is massive, Ready for Revolution. I'm learning. I read it when it came out, but I'm rereading it now, and it's just so many insights that come out in that book. So a lot of us don't even know about our own struggle, and we don't know that Patrice Lumumba's is connected to the CIA, that his death. And I think if we read more about our history, that we would have an understanding, a greater understanding of what reparations are all about and why people are pushing so hard for it and have been pushing hard for it even before Belinda did in 1780.
It was fun. First of all, I can almost reached that Touré autobiography from my seat, which is because I think it's something worthy of referring back to, and it is so thick and filled and rich with so much. Now, and I still struggle to imagine how one credited with founding the field of Black Power studies could write a biography about the man that doesn't reference his own autobiography. I mean, I don't know how cats can do that, but I was looking back at the history of Belinda, trying to just get a little bit prepared for today's conversation, and it is fascinating. I would want you to talk a little bit about her, given the breadth of history, because so she ends up in the 18th century trying to get reparations for herself. Mm-hmm. The first thought I had that I would want to ask you about here is, wouldn't part of the response to using her case and cases like hers to get reparations be, but she herself had been enslaved? Professor Winbush, you, Jared Ball, people in the chat, you haven't actually been enslaved. So why should her case be relevant? But in the process of answering that, which I don't really know needs an answer, I would be more interested in you just reminding us about who she was and what she did.
Well, very quickly, Belinda Royale Sutton was captured about 1715 in Ghana. She talked about the men in her, if you read her petition, she talked about the men who came at night with faces like the moon and stole her, and then took her initially, I always forget the name of this island, it's in the Caribbean, and was purchased by this guy named Isaac Royal, with 2 L's at the end, who also gave the initial funding for the Harvard Law School. In fact, they had a chair there called the Isaac Royal Chair, So when at the outbreak of the Civil War, I'm going to make a long story short. At the outbreak of the Civil War, her so-called master fled from Boston to Canada because he was supporting the British, and he got out of the country. And she then sued him for 50 years of unpaid labor in 1781. I say in the book that we don't, she was illiterate. I've actually seen the original petition in Worcester, Massachusetts, that was written by someone that lived about 5 miles from her, named Phyllis Wheatley. Or Primus, what's his name? Primus Hall, the son of what's his name, the founder of the AME Church. But
Prince
anyway,
Hall. Yeah.
Prince Hall, Masons. And it's an amazing story that she had petitioned.
You're a funny scholar to remember Primus and not Prince. That's funny how your memory could work. You'd be so deep in it that you remember the harder one and not the easy.
Yeah, the easy one would have been Prince Hall.
Yeah.
But long story short, she won the first year. They gave her approximately $1,500, which in today's money would have been something, I forget, like $20-something thousand. They defaulted on the rest of the payments, and I'm in the process now. In fact, I've been running back and forth to Boston, trying to locate her grave. I believe it's located far from Phyllis Wheatley, who's buried downtown in the same graveyard that Ben Franklin and Alexander Hamilton are buried in, because she was held in high esteem, believe it or not. So, and
it was Antigua, by the way.
I just saw somebody. It was Antigua. Thank you. It was Antigua that she was taken to. So, I think that's over 240 odd years ago, and now we're finding there was a woman even before her, Mum Bet. Elizabeth Mum Bet, and she was W.B. Du Bois's step grandmother. She petitioned a year earlier than Belinda. So I'm doing some revision right now of the book, and I'm going to include her in it, in fact.
Okay. In other words, the history for this is old, and people have been making the argument for a long time, because it is in some ways basically, I mean, Not that the people themselves were simple, but it's a simple concept. I've been working for free. I mean,
and that's what it is, Jared. I've been working for free. I want to get paid. Okay, that's it. That's it. If people say, "Well, she was enslaved," look, we've got Native American treaty violations dating back 150 years, but we paid reparations now. So it's not, reparations and what enslavement is a crime against humanity. There are no statutes of limitation on crimes against humanity. We have a right to collect.
Which is even why I admit to at some points being compelled by the argument that starts even with something as recent as Jim Crow. I mean, if you just even repair from then, it's a steep bill. I mean, so people could say, well, you weren't enslaved. All right, fine. Start from, I mean, even I love the clock starting in 1441, but even if you started at 1981, I mean, it would be tremendous. A debt would be tremendous that would have to be paid. Exactly. Anyway, so so we'll just have to say as we wrap up, unfortunately, this conversation, that everything is due and every form is due, and everybody that can be down with the argument should get involved and support it. That was the only thing real quick that I would want to say is that when we look at the other cases of reparations being paid, because the Japanese only got like $20,000 check. I mean, they didn't get a lot. And they lost billions of dollars worth of land on the West Coast. Indigenous people, I can't imagine whatever they've gotten comes even anywhere close to repairing them, since most of them live on $2 a day. And then even news, when I went back and was looking at Norman Finkelstein's The Holocaust Industry book. First of all, I would agree, since the comparison to Jews is often made, then the comparison should also be the international one, because it was an international struggle for reparations for Jews. It didn't just go, it wasn't just Israel. Exactly. It was the whole diaspora got involved. But more to my concern is that Finkelstein points out that the money got ripped off, long story short. Even the money that got paid was ripped off by elite Jews who ripped off the movement. So as we even look to compare or make comparisons, we should be cautious to not mimic everything that these other groups were doing.
Absolutely.
Anyway, but Dr. Winbush, look, I appreciate you coming on with us, and I know you got something else to get to, and having this conversation. I again want to thank you again publicly for your personal support of me over these last couple of years, and many others that I see you doing from the IUR at Morgan State, and for your long time work on this and many other issues related to African people. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Jared, and keep doing what you're doing too, brother. It's very important, very important.
Well, we'll keep on swinging, as they say. But thank you very much, and peace to you, Dr. Winbush. We'll catch up with you as soon as we can. And I want to thank everybody else for joining me again. And for those who joined us earlier, stuck with us all day, I appreciate it. It's been a long, fun morning of talking to the African world about African problems and African solutions. Please check back with us at imixwhatilike.org and subscribe there. Please at imixwhatilike for all your relevant social media, subscribe, all of that. Keep the conversation going. And yeah, no, I appreciate that. Shout out, and again, that's Dr. Burroughs' concept, and I would love to try to make it as real as possible. And as long as I can sit here and do that, that'd be great. And when we get more involved, we'll do that as well. But anyway, like Fred Hampton used to say to you, we say peace if you're willing to fight for it. So peace, everybody. We'll catch you next time right here at I Mix What I Like. I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I